talking of hit movies, Shawshank Redemption, obviously,
great.
That film has never been a hit.
Tanked at the box office. And the reason for that is, of course, is that the only real marketing movies get, I think, is word of mouth.
You've watched Andy squeeze through that filthy sewer and feel the rain on his face. But the truth is, even die-hard fans haven't seen the whole story of his escape. Behind the camera, every step of that journey was packed with unexpected challenges, hidden details, and moments the cast swears almost derailed the shoot.
It's been 30 years since the box office hit Shawshank Redemption came out. That movie, it captures the relationship between Red and Andy inside a state penitentiary. It was filmed not far from Central Ohio at the Ohio State Reformatory.
From secret props and improvised stunts to technical disasters that somehow worked on screen, Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, and the crew reveal the behind-the-scenes chaos that made Shawshank so unforgettable. Stick around, because what you think you know about this classic movie is about to get completely rewritten.
So people went to see the Shawshank Redemption, and then they came back, oh man, I saw this really terrific movie. It's called the Shank Sham Shark.
The casting choices that could have changed everything. It's kind of wild to think about now, but the Shawshank Redemption almost looked nothing like the movie we all know. Imagine Andy Dufresne being played by Tom Cruise. Yep, by the early 1990s, Cruise was already one of the biggest names in Hollywood, and he even showed up to early table reads to try the part out. The producers were thrilled at the thought of his name on the poster because it practically guaranteed a hit. But Cruise wasn't fully on board. He liked the script, sure, but he wasn't convinced about the director. At that point, Frank Darabont was just a first-time filmmaker. He had scraped together $5,000 to buy the rights to Stephen King's novella, and he wasn't exactly a household name. Then Rob Reiner entered the picture. Reiner had already adapted King's Stand By Me and loved Darabont's script so much that he offered a couple of $1 million to buy it outright and direct it himself. His vision was a star-studded, Hollywood-polished version with Tom Cruise as Andy and Harrison Ford as Red. Cruise even said he'd only do the movie if Reiner was the one behind the camera. Now imagine being Darabont. You're broke, someone waves a life-changing check in your face, plus the promise of getting to direct whatever you want next. Most people would have said yes, but Darabont didn't. He turned it down because he didn't want to give up the one project he truly cared about. That decision opened the door for casting to go in a completely different direction. Tom Hanks was approached, but went with Forrest Gump. Kevin Costner was busy with Waterworld. Nicolas Cage and Johnny Depp were on the list too, but Darabont kept coming back to Tim Robbins. He'd seen him in Jacob's Ladder and thought Robbins had the quiet intelligence and patience to pull off Andy, someone you could believe would spend 20 years digging through a wall without anyone noticing. And then there was Red. In King's story, Red was a red-haired Irishman, so early talks involved names like Clint Eastwood, Robert Duvall, and Paul Newman. But producer Liz Glotzer kept bringing up Morgan Freeman. Darabont admired his earlier work, and when Freeman read the script, he immediately connected with it. The Irish detail was brushed aside with one of the film's best little jokes. Maybe it's because I'm Irish. Looking back, it's hard to imagine anyone else. A Cruise Ford version might have been a hit, but Robbins and Freeman gave the film a quieter, more human heart. And that's probably why Shawshank still feels timeless today. Shawshank's real prison walls. So, here's something most people don't realize when they first watch The Shawshank Redemption. That giant, gloomy prison wasn't some Hollywood set at all. It was a real place called the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, and by the time filming started, it already had a pretty rough history. The prison had actually been shut down in the early 1990s, after a federal court declared the living conditions inside were too inhumane to continue. The plan was to demolish it not long after, but when the film came along, production sort of bought the place a little more time and kept the wrecking ball away for at least another year. When the cast and crew walked in for the first time, it wasn't hard to imagine what life there must have been like. Clancy Brown, the actor who played Captain Hadley, once said that you barely had to act because the building itself gave you everything you needed. Just stepping into those cell blocks with the cold stone walls and the echoes bouncing around was enough to put you in the right mindset. To make it feel even more real, the production hired some guards from a nearby working prison as extras, and even they warned the crew that the place could be unsettling at night. Some swore you might even hear screams. And here's another interesting detail. Many of the men filling out the background weren't trained actors at all. They were former inmates who had actually served time in that same building. So when you see them glaring at the bus of fresh fish in the movie, that's not acting, that's them remembering. Tim Robbins later mentioned that the place never seemed to warm up. Even in May, when the weather outside should have been comfortable, the stone walls were so cold that you could see your breath while filming. That chill gave an extra punch to scenes like the famous fresh fish chant. Even the design choices leaned into the real decay of the place. Production designer Terrence Marsh decided to film the warden's office in a part of the prison that was literally crumbling with water leaking down the walls because he felt like the space should visually represent how rotten the warden was on the inside. All of this made the prison itself feel like another actor in the film, and honestly, it gave the movie a kind of grit you just wouldn't get on a soundstage. The rock hammer nobody wanted to notice. Now, let's talk about Andy's little rock hammer, one of the smallest but most important props in the entire film. It looks harmless on screen, like something you might pick up at a school geology fair, but the whole trick was making sure both the guards in the story and the audience watching never suspected what it could really do. The prop team, led by Mark Stetson, had to work carefully to get it just right. Early versions looked too sharp and dangerous, almost like weapons, which wouldn't have sold the illusion. So the team kept filing it down and reshaping it until it looked completely ordinary, like something that could easily slip under the radar. But here's the cool part. They didn't just make one hammer. They made several different versions for different situations. There was the hero hammer, made out of solid steel for the close-up shots where you needed to see it in detail. Then there was a rubber one that Tim Robbins could tuck into the hollowed-out Bible without worrying about damage. And finally, there was a super light resin version used during the escape sequence, so Robbins could handle it easily during the more physical scenes. They even went as far as creating different stages of wear. The brand new one when Red first gets it, a slightly used one with duller edges to show time passing, and the final worn-down hammer, which was supposed to look like what the police would have eventually found. One detail fans really love is where the hammer was hidden in Andy's Bible. That placement wasn't just random. The prop master suggested putting it right after the book of Exodus, the story of escape, which gave the whole thing a deeper meaning. And the filmmakers even thought about sound. There's that cafeteria scene where Andy taps the hammer against a tray. In real life, it made a clear metallic ping, but they actually stripped that sound out in editing so your brain doesn't register it as important. It was the ultimate misdirection, a symbol of freedom disguised as something completely ordinary, hiding in plain sight for nearly 2 decades of the story's timeline. Morgan Freeman wasn't the only Freeman on set. Here's a fun one a lot of people miss. Morgan Freeman wasn't the only Freeman in the movie. That voice you hear yelling fresh fish today, we're reeling them in, when the new inmates arrive, that wasn't just some random extra. It was actually Morgan's son, Alfonso Freeman. He had been working behind the scenes as a production assistant, And when the crew realized they needed a loud, memorable voice for the off-camera taunts, he jumped in to do it. His voice even cracked a little on the word fish, and director Frank Darabont liked that natural imperfection so much that he kept it in the final cut. Alfonso popped up in another clever way, too. When you see Red's parole file and the mugshot of a much younger version of him, that's not an old picture of Morgan Freeman. Instead, the crew used Alfonso, who was in his mid-30s at the time, and dressed him up with a fake mustache so he looked the part. It was a lot easier than trying to de-age Morgan or track down an old photo that matched the movie's look. So, in a weird but fitting way, Alfonso gave the film both a voice and a face. The taunts Andy first hears when he steps into Shawshank, and the photo of a younger Red sitting in his parole file. It's one of those little family touches that adds to the film's legacy. For a story about second chances, resilience, and passing things down, having a father and son both contribute like that feels strangely perfect. The beer on the roof truth. That rooftop beer scene is one of the most relaxed, feel-good moments in the whole movie. Andy and the guys finally get a taste of freedom with the sun shining and cold bottles in hand. But behind the camera, it was a totally different story. William Sadler, who played Haywood, said it was 3 long days of real roofing work. The cast was actually spreading hot tar on a metal roof in the middle of an Ohio summer. The heat got so intense that the on-set thermometer hit over 100 degrees and the camera lenses started to warp. Instead of fighting it, cinematographer Roger Deakins just used the distortion to add that shimmering, hazy look, which made the whole scene feel dreamlike on screen. And the ice-cold beers everyone looked so happy about. Not so much. They were drinking O'Doul's non-alcoholic beer, and in the heat, it went warm and stale almost immediately. Sadler later joked that the only thing authentic about that scene was the pounding headache they all had from the heat and the exhaustion. The tired but satisfied smiles on their faces weren't just acting. It was also the relief of taking a break after working in those brutal conditions. Brooks' bird was never supposed to fly. Brooks's pet crow, Jake, is one of those little details that makes the story hit harder. But fun fact, the bird wasn't even in the original script. Director Frank Darabont added it after watching a documentary about inmates keeping pets, thinking it was the perfect way to show Brooks's dependence on the prison walls. The bird was a last-minute find too. Its trainer, Debbie Looney, rescued it from a pet shop just a couple of days before filming. Working with the crow wasn't always smooth. For example, when Brooks feeds Jake a maggot, animal welfare reps on set said they couldn't use a live one, so the props team made a fake maggot out of baby food. And in the scene where Brooks lets Jake go, Debbie stood off-camera with mealworms on her shoulder, so the bird would fly toward her. There's even a nice hidden touch right after Brooks's exit. In the library, a feather floats down onto Andy's shoulder, like Brooks's presence still lingers. A deleted scene even showed Jake dying, with the inmates holding a little funeral for him, but Darabont cut it to keep the metaphor of hope alive. The poster swap you missed. Those iconic posters in Andy's cell, Rita Hayworth, then Marilyn Monroe, and finally Raquel Welch, aren't just there to look cool or make the place feel lived in. They're actually like a visual timeline of his escape, showing how long he's been chipping away at that wall. In Stephen King's original novella, it was only Rita Hayworth, but Frank Darabont decided to layer in the other 2 posters to give viewers a subtle sense of time passing, which is pretty clever when you think about it. There was also a lot of thought behind the practical side of it. Costume designer Elizabeth McBride added little elastic bands to the top corners so Tim Robbins could pull down the Raquel Welch poster in one smooth, satisfying motion. That moment, when the poster comes off the wall, is perfect because it's seamless and doesn't ruin the reveal. But here's a detail most people miss. If you look closely, you can still see the corner of the Marilyn Monroe poster peeking out from behind it. It's like a tiny breadcrumb, a little wink for viewers who are really paying attention, showing the history of Andy's progress and making the escape feel that much more real. It's small, but it makes a big difference in how we experience the story. Music that breaks the walls. You remember that scene when Andy sneaks into the warden's office and cranks Mozart through the loudspeakers? It's barely a minute long, but honestly, it's one of the most powerful bits in the whole movie. Funny thing is, it was way harder to shoot than it looks. They spent 2 full days on it, and Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, went all out to make it feel almost otherworldly. Instead of overlighting the place, he actually bounced one huge lamp off these massive white sheets, so the glow on the prisoners' faces looked almost holy, which is wild when you think about it because it's just a bunch of tired guys standing in a prison yard. But the sneaky magic of that scene is in the sound. The sound designer, Bob Lively, slipped in this faint clang of a prison door under the opera. You don't really notice it unless you're listening for it, but it changes how you feel. It makes the music feel like it's pushing against the walls, like hope invading a hopeless place. And then there's Morgan Freeman's line about not knowing what the Italian ladies were singing about. Turns out he recorded that narration while he had a cold, so that gravel in his voice is totally real. Even funnier, the first time he recorded it, there was this annoying hiss in the background, so he had to redo the whole thing. In the end, though, it worked out, because that slightly tired, raspy delivery became part of what makes the moment so unforgettable. The alternate ending that almost existed. Here's something wild. The big emotional reunion at the beach almost didn't happen. In Stephen King's original story, Red never actually sees Andy again. It just ends with him riding a bus, heading toward Mexico, and saying he hopes the Pacific Ocean is as blue as he dreamed. That's it. No hugs, no big payoff. The studio didn't like that, though. They basically told Frank Darabont, the director, "We need a happier ending, something really hopeful." At first, he thought that would be too cheesy, but he shot it anyway, and when they tested it with early audiences, people actually did call it cheesy. For a while, it looked like the ending might get scrapped, but instead of cutting it, Darabont figured out a workaround. He added Red's voiceover about choosing to get busy living, which gave the scene some grounding, so it wasn't just 2 guys hugging on a beach. And get this, the final shot, when Andy and Red actually embrace, wasn't perfectly planned. A wave rolled in out of nowhere and smacked the camera lens, making the picture go all soft and blurry. Most directors would have reshot it, but Darabont loved how dreamy it looked, like fate itself was helping out. So he left it in. Crazy to think one of the most iconic, uplifting endings in film history only exists because the studio forced it. Audiences hated it at first, and then a random wave tied it all together. Hidden name game. Okay, blink and you'll miss this one, but it's kind of fun. When Andy walks into the bank after escaping, he uses the name Randall Stevens. You only see it for like 2 seconds on a Social Security card, but the prop team put a lot of effort into making it look real, coffee stains and all. Here's the kicker. In the original story, the fake identity wasn't Randall at all. It was Peter Stevens. But the legal department worried there might actually be a real Peter Stevens out there who could sue them, so they asked for a name change. Darabont, being the massive Stephen King fan that he is, didn't just pick something random. He swapped Peter for Randall as a little Easter egg for die-hard King readers. Randall Flagg is one of King's most famous villains. He shows up in The Stand, The Dark Tower, and a bunch of other books. So yeah, while Andy's supposed to be living his best life as this polished fake businessman, the name he's using is actually tied to one of King's darkest characters. Most people watching never catch it, but for the ones who do, it's a pretty cool inside joke, almost like Darabont couldn't resist slipping a wink into the middle of Andy's victory lap. The tunnelless birth canal. Everyone remembers Andy crawling through that disgusting sewer pipe. And yeah, the symbolism is obvious. It's like a rebirth, crawling out of darkness into freedom. But behind the scenes, it was less spiritual and way more gross. Tim Robbins had to crawl through a steel tube that was barely wider than his shoulders, and they designed it that way on purpose to make him actually feel claustrophobic. Just in case it got too intense, they even gave him a panic button, though he never used it. And that sewage he was crawling through? Not real, thankfully, but still nasty. The crew whipped up a mix of chocolate syrup, sawdust, and cold coffee. So imagine crawling through something that smells like a funky mocha left out in the sun. For the big finale, when Andy bursts out into the creek, they had to dam up the water so it would rise high enough. The problem? The creek was full of runoff from a nearby farm, which meant cow manure. Not exactly the triumphant escape vibe they were going for. They dumped in chemicals to sterilize it, but still, gross. The best part, though, is when Andy finally stands up in the rain and gasps like he's just been reborn. That gasp wasn't acting. Robbins had been holding his breath for about 1.5 minutes in that nasty tunnel, so when he came out and inhaled, that was pure relief. Basically, the scene works so well because he was actually going through his own little hell to get there. Red's final decision wasn't in the script. One of the quieter moments in the movie actually wasn't planned at all. You know when Red finds the spot where Andy left him the letter, and before heading off, he carves "So was Red under Brooks was here"? That wasn't in the script. It was something Morgan Freeman came up with on the spot. They were doing some late pickup shots, and he just decided the story needed it. Turns out, he was right. That little carving is what makes the moment so powerful. It shows Red isn't just following Andy's directions. He's making his own choice to embrace hope, finally breaking free of the institutional mindset that trapped Brooks. Without it, the scene might have felt like he was just going through the motions. With it, it becomes this quiet declaration that he's moving forward on his own terms. And here's a cool detail. The pocket knife Freeman uses in that scene wasn't a prop. It was actually his own knife, something he carried as a personal good luck charm. So you've got this improvised action, plus a personal item from the actor himself. And suddenly, you get this perfect little closing note on Red's journey. It's simple, understated, and honestly, one of those moments where you realize sometimes the best stuff in movies happens when the actors just follow their instincts. Which of these details completely changes how you see the film? Was it the Cruise-Ford swap that would have given us a blockbuster but lost the soul? The subtle genius of the harmless-looking rock hammer? Or the fact that the iconic beach ending almost ended up on the cutting room floor? Drop your pick in the comments below, and make sure you smash that subscribe button before the warden finds this channel.